If you're thinking about buying a home in California in the next 12 months, keep watching. In this video, I'm laying out the entire home buying process step by step so that you know exactly what to expect. This is the video I wish I had when I bought my first home in 2009. And I'm also going to share some pro tips that will save you headache and money, like tens of thousands of dollars when you buy. I'm John Schwartz. I'm a serial home buyer. I'm on my fourth home right now, and a real estate investor and a realtor who helps home buyers understand the process and cut their home buyer agent fee by an average of 77%. Learn more at buywithblueprint.com. Now let's get right into it. Okay, so there are 3 stages to the home buying process. The first stage is the financing, and I know that's already a 10-cent word, but don't worry. We'll get into it, define it. It'll all be demystified. The second stage is the house hunting, and this is the fun part. There's lots of internet tools to help you do this. And once you get into it, it's really fun to go around looking at houses that you could potentially buy. And the third stage is the purchase process, also known as escrow. Yes, we will be talking about escrow. I'll actually tell you what it is. This is a part of the process that most people don't understand, even when they're going through it. So getting a brief education on what actually happens during the purchasing process or the escrow process, you're going to be a step ahead. And you're going to be all the more confident when you go to buy your home. So we'll start with financing. So financing just refers to how you pay for your home. Obviously, most people don't have $800,000 of cash laying around to buy a house. Obviously, some do, but most don't. So you have to take out a loan. Now, the part of the house that you pay out of your own money is called your down payment, and the remainder is your loan, the amount of money you're borrowing to buy the house. Now, you can put down as little as 5%, so let's just use very round numbers to make this easy and talk about a $1 million home. This line here represents the home, and if you're putting down 5%, that would be maybe about that much, 5%, and on $1 million, that's $50,000, and a bank lends you the rest, which of course is $950,000. Or you could put 20% down. In that case, your down payment looks more like this. Good old 20%. That's $200,000. And you borrow $800,000. So how do you figure out what financing scenario is going to work for you? Well, you need to talk to a lender. 2 reasons. A lender is going to help you figure out what your maximum budget is. Your maximum budget is based on the mortgage payment that you're capable of paying based on your income and the other debt payments you have, like a car payment or a student loan payment. And the math is a little complicated, but a lender does it every day. So you speak to a lender, you tell them how much money you make, you tell them what your student loan payment or your car payment is, and then the lender does the math and comes out with a number like, you could afford a house up to $800,000 with 5% down. Now, obviously, you don't necessarily want to buy a house at your maximum budget, but just by speaking to a lender, you'll begin to understand what different houses cost in terms of that monthly payment. Because that's really what you're going to be buying a house based on, the monthly payment that you end up with as a result of the purchase. And then secondly, you need to speak to a lender to get pre-approval. Pre-approval means that the lender looks at various income statements, namely your tax returns and maybe some recent pay stubs to prove out your income so that they can confidently say that this home buyer is pre-approved for a loan up to, for example, $800,000. And the reason you need pre-approval is not just so that your income can be verified, so that you really know how big of a house or how expensive a house you're able to buy, but so that you can present a pre-approval letter with your offer. You really can't offer on a home without a pre-approval letter. Sellers just won't take you seriously. So you need to talk to a lender to figure out your budget and then to get a pre-approval letter. All right, how do you find a lender? A couple of ideas. If you had a friend who recently bought a home, ask them for a referral to their lender. Next, check with your bank or credit union. Go to your bank or credit union's website and find the search bar and search for mortgage. Most banks and credit unions offer mortgages, and they like doing mortgages with their existing clients. Thirdly, Google the name of your city plus lender. See what pops up. Talk to a couple of lenders. When you find someone who seems trustworthy, get pre-approved with them. And once you get pre-approved once, you should go ahead and get pre-approved by another lender or 2 so that you can compare rates. And lastly, here are 3 lenders that I've worked with that I like, and I can't speak for every one of their sales reps, but these are 3 reputable companies in California. If nothing else, check them out. And once you have your pre-approval letter, you get to start the fun part, house hunting. Okay, so the bad news is that the California Association of Realtors recently changed their rules such that agents in California are required to get a signed representation agreement with potential buyers before showing any homes. And a lot of California home buyers are already encountering this. They want to see a home, they call up a realtor, and the realtor says, great, I'll show you the home, but first you have to sign this agreement to work with me and pay me 2.5% or 3%. And understandably, a lot of California home buyers aren't comfortable with this upfront commitment, especially if they barely know this realtor. I mean, 3% of a home in California is really expensive. And I have to tell you, even as a realtor myself, I see this as gatekeeping at its finest, or really at its worst. The good news is, today, you don't actually need an agent to smartly and comprehensively shop for a home in California. I'm sure you're familiar with these three companies: Redfin.com, Zillow.com, and Realtor.com. These three websites syndicate the listings on the MLS. That's where listings officially live. And so you have access to every listing in California through any one of these three sites. And all three of these sites have great features to search for a home, save your search, and then set up notifications so that you can get notified either immediately or daily or weekly about new listings that have come to market. Let me show you how that works in Redfin. So here we are in Redfin looking at the east side of Los Angeles, and it's 3 simple steps. 1, use the draw feature to literally draw an outline around the area that you're interested in buying a home. 2, go to the price parameters and you can set an upper limit. Let's say LA is kind of expensive, so we'll set this at 1.6 million. And then 3, you can even apply filters to your search so you're just looking for the kinds of homes you want. So we can come down to home type and just select house. So this way we won't be looking for townhomes or condos or land or multifamily. Done. So now our search represents all the homes in the area that we want to live, in the price range that we can afford, and the kind of home that we want to buy. So I'll come up here and click Save Search. And then as you can see, not only will the search be saved, but I have the option of email notifications. I can be emailed instantly, daily, or never, but that's not really an option. Let's choose daily. I click Done. And now I will get from Redfin an email every day with the new listings, as well as homes that have come back to market and homes that have had price reductions. Almost every new listing that comes to market is going to have open houses the first weekend that it's available. So clear up your weekends and get ready to start spending your weekends house hunting. It's a little bit arduous, but it's also really fun to drive around the city and see different homes in different places. And if there aren't any open houses scheduled, you can actually call the listing agent directly on a Redfin page where you find it. You just scroll down to where it says about this home, and at the bottom, you'll have the listing agent's information, including phone number and email address. And there's nothing to preclude you from just calling the listing agent directly and asking to see the house. Listing agents do not need to sign buyer representation agreements with prospective buyers when they show a home on behalf of their client, the seller. And if you think this is the route you want to go, shopping for a home without committing upfront to paying an agent 2.5% or 3% of the purchase price on top of the purchase price, check out the resource I'm building, Blueprint, at buywithblueprint.com. There you'll find more training and resources about how to shop for a home without an agent. And if you need any help getting a showing, I can help you commitment-free. Check out buywithblueprint.com for more info. Eventually, you're going to find a house you love and you're going to want to make an offer. And this marks the beginning of the purchase process. And of course, the first step of the purchase process is making an offer. Now, you may think that an offer is just a price. You're offering a price to buy the home. But there's actually 3 components to an offer. The first is, of course, the price you're offering. The second component is the offer terms, and we'll explain what that means and get into some terms. And the third component of an offer is the timeline, a suggested timeline for how escrow will happen. Now, the price component is pretty self-explanatory. You're offering a price. If it's a very hot home with a lot of interest, you might want to offer above the asking price to hope that your offer wins out. If it's a home that's not getting a lot of love and not a lot of interest, you might want to offer below the asking price because you can probably get a bit of a deal. And that's price. Now let's get into terms. So terms constitute the details about how you're paying for the home. It's kind of like when you see a car ad and it's like drive off the lot, no money down. And then at the bottom of the ad, there's all that fine print about like the APR and your minimum credit score and blah, 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 blah. Terms are the fine print. And there are 3 main items that you'll see in terms. The first item that falls under terms are your financing details. So when you buy a house, you don't just say how much you're going to pay for it. You also have to tell the seller how you're paying for it, what your down payment is, and what your loan amount's going to be. And the reason for this is so the seller can assess the strength of your offer. An all-cash offer is the strongest offer. An offer with 20 or even more % down is the next strongest offer. And an offer with the minimum down payment is considered the weakest kind of offer. And I think the sun just went behind a cloud. It got all dark in here. So you have to include these details in your offer. It's required. Secondly, you might ask for a seller concession. A seller concession is money the seller gives back to you at the closing table. It's like the seller takes some of their proceeds from the sale and credits it right back to you at the closing table. And this lowers your closing costs. Now, cleaner offers don't ask for a seller concession. The fewer terms you have, the cleaner your offer is, and sellers like clean offers. But often purchases in California require bringing $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 to the closing table. So you might up your offer by $20,000 and then ask for a $20,000 seller concession just to bring your closing costs down by $20,000. And then finally, your offer is likely to include a request for agent compensation. Now, this is a new item since the recent rule changes about how agents get paid. The way it typically works is, as I said, in order to see homes with an agent, you have to commit upfront to paying that agent 2.5% or 3%. Now, a lot of home buyers can't afford this, so when they make an offer, they ask for the seller to compensate their agent 2.5% or 3%. Let me show you what the math looks like on this. So going back to our simple $1 million home, if you offer $1 million, but want the seller to compensate your agent 3%, which of course is $30,000, then really what you're offering is $970,000 because the seller gets that $1 million and then has to turn around right away and give $30,000 to your agent. And this, of course, just has the effect of making your offer $30,000 less attractive. And this is another area where Blueprint can help. So Blueprint is a home buyer's resource. And when you hire me as your agent, you get this resource through the whole home buying process. And what you also get when you work with me is a low, flat representation fee of $5,900. Let me show you how the math works out on that. Here we have another $1 million property with a $1 million offer, but the agent's fee is a flat $5,900. So the effective offer is $994,100. Now, obviously, if you're selling your home, you're going to want to take the offer that's really $994,000 over the offer that's really $970,000, right? Another way you can do this is with a seller concession that will go from the seller to the buyer, and then the buyer can use some of that concession to pay their agent's fee. So for example, let me just get rid of this old-fashioned way of doing it. A buyer can make their $1 million offer and then ask for a $10,000 seller concession. That leaves the effective offer being $990,000. And then with that $10,000, the buyer can pay their agent fee, in my case, cover it completely, and then have some additional money to put toward closing costs. Either way, both of these scenarios are better than making an offer asking for a 3% commission for the buyer's agent. All right, and then lastly, you offer a timeline for how the escrow process will proceed. Now, we're going to talk about escrow in a moment, but what matters in this timeline you're suggesting are contingencies. So what is a contingency? A contingency is an opportunity for you as the buyer to cancel the contract. And in your offer, you propose a timeline of when you'll be removing the contingencies of the offer. Now, again, we're going to get into this when we talk about escrow, but the contingencies are the inspection contingency, which is usually removed 10 days after an offer is accepted. The appraisal contingency, which is usually removed, give or take, 15 days after an offer is accepted. And then the loan contingency, which is typically removed plus or minus 20 days after the offer is accepted. Now, the inspection contingency, when you should remove it, is a decision that you'll make with your agent. The appraisal and loan contingency removal days are usually determined by your lender. So that's something you'll ask your lender as to what you should put into your offer. All right, you've made your offer. There are 4 possible responses you can get. One is rejection. The seller could just say, no, I reject this offer. Now, that doesn't mean you can't offer again. It just means they're not going to engage you on that offer. Your offer could be accepted, which means the seller looks at your offer, looks at the price, the terms, and the timeline, and say, yes, this works for me. Accepted. You could get a counter offer, and this is basically opening the process to a negotiation. This usually happens when a property's been sitting around and has not gotten an asking price offer. Maybe you offer below asking, let's say $20K below asking, and the seller counters with a price $10K below asking. You have the option to accept this, you can reject this, or you can counter back. It becomes a negotiation. Or you might get what's called a multiple counter offer. This is when the seller sends the same counter offer to multiple parties. And usually multiple counter offers have language asking for each buyer's best and final offer. In this case, the situation becomes more of an auction. And whatever buyer is able to put forward the best and final offer with best and final price and best and final terms is going to win the bidding. In this situation, you're not really negotiating with the seller. You're competing in an auction against other buyers. All right, so let's say you make an offer, you get a counter offer, you get a multiple counter offer, blah, 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 blah. You move forward. You finally get to acceptance. You have an accepted offer. What happens then? Well, you go into escrow, or another way to say it is escrow opens. Of course, the question is, what the hell is escrow? Let me explain it this way. Buying a home is a really complicated process, and before the money in the house can actually exchange hands, There are responsibilities that the buyer and the seller must perform. The buyer's duties include inspecting the house to make sure there aren't any defects. They have to wire their down payment, the amount of the purchase price that they're paying for themselves. The buyer has to remove the contingencies that we just mentioned, and we'll get into in more detail in a second. And they have to close the loan, which means getting the house appraised and getting homeowners insurance. There's a couple things you have to do to actually close the loan. And it takes a buyer some time to do all these things. And at the same time, the seller has some tasks. So first and foremost, the seller has to prove that they can actually sell the home. They have to prove that they're the owner, that they're the only owner, and that they're allowed to sell it. And this is actually mostly done by a title company in the background, but nonetheless, it takes a couple of days to make sure that this is the case. So while the buyer and seller are respectively completing their duties that are outlined in the contract that's been signed by both parties, there's a neutral third party, and that is the escrow officer. And the escrow officer has a bank account called the escrow account. And the escrow officer keeps tabs on both parties as they complete their tasks, so that when both parties have completed all of their tasks, the escrow officer can say, this transaction is complete, I'm sending the money to the seller, and sending the keys to the house to the buyer. And so when people say that escrow opens, they mean that an escrow officer has been hired and has opened the escrow account. So since we're talking about buying, let's discuss what this process looks like for the buyer. So the easiest way to think about it is to say that the home buyer's responsibility is to remove all of the contingencies. And remember, a contingency is a get out of jail free card. It's an opportunity for the buyer to cancel the contract. So the buyer has to one by one remove the contingencies, and then once they're all lifted, the only option left, which is what happens at the close of escrow, is to actually complete the contract. And the first contingency to remove is the inspection contingency. And as we discussed, this is usually done in the first 10 days of escrow. And these first 10 days of escrow are the busiest time of escrow because this is where the buyer is actually very involved. There are a lot of inspections to consider doing. You definitely want to do a general inspection, and this is when a licensed inspector comes to your house and looks over everything. They point out every single defect they can find, from very small defects like a chip in the cover of a light switch to very big defects like cracks in the foundations or leaking pipes, and they point out everything. And if the general inspector finds a defect in any of the major systems like the roof or the foundation or the plumbing or the electrical wiring, they'll recommend that you hire a specialist to come out for a further inspection and also to get a bid on how much it would cost to repair the problem. It's also highly recommended in California to do a termite inspection because termites are everywhere. It's not so much a question of whether or not a house has termites in it. It's a question of how many termites does the house have and how much will it cost to get rid of them. It's also a good idea to get a sewer line inspection. Now, the sewer line carries your pee-pee and poo-poo from your house to the main city sewer line. And sewer lines are generally unproblematic, but when they do have an issue, it can be expensive. So it's good to get that sewer line inspected just to make sure there's not a $10,000 or $20,000 problem hiding in there. Now, I mentioned that the general inspector might call out specific systems and ask you to have a further inspection on it. And typically what you find is a foundation inspection might be called for if there are any cracks in the foundation. Now, a cracked foundation is not a lost cause. In fact, foundation cracks are easily repaired. Maybe they cost about $1,000 a pop to do it. And so this is my advice to all of my clients. If there is a foundation crack, don't freak out. Have the foundation inspection executed and get a bid for how much it will cost to repair, because often it is not a huge problem. Roof inspections are also quite common because we live underneath a hot, hot sun here in California. There's a lot of great natural elements, but they wear on roofs. And so usually there's something to point out on a roof, and it's good to have a roofer come take a look and let you know how much it would cost to repair. And speaking of repairs, the final process of the inspection contingency is the request for repairs or credit. So based on what you find in your inspections, you can ask the seller to either perform repairs herself or credit you the cost of the repairs so that you can perform them after you take ownership of the house. This is a negotiation. The seller is not obligated to pay for repairs for what's found in the house. But you're also protected at this point by the inspection contingency. You haven't removed it yet, so you can actually just cancel the contract if you and the seller can't come to an agreement about who pays for what. So while the seller has no obligation to negotiate, you have all the leverage because you can cancel the contract. And in most cases, a middle ground is found where the seller pays for most obvious or dangerous defects, but the buyer appreciates that they're not buying a perfect home and accepts some defects with the house. Once this negotiation is settled, then the buyer removes the inspection contingency. Next up is the appraisal contingency. And again, this is usually meant to be lifted plus or minus 15 days. Some lenders can do it in a shorter amount of time. Some lenders need a little more time. And the appraisal is required by the lender. Here's why. The lender has agreed to pay a certain percentage of the home, say 90%, but they're only going to pay the lesser of these two, the purchase price or the appraised value. Let me show you an example. Let's say we're back to our $1 million home and you're putting 10% down. Let's put the 1 million. So you're putting in $100,000 and your lender is putting in $900,000, which is 90%. Well, let's say this property only appraises for $950,000. Well, the lender is only going to give you 90% of this number because it's the lesser of the purchase price or the appraised value. And 90% of $950,000 turns out to be $855,000. So in order to purchase this $1 million home, you have to come out of pocket $145,000. And that's $45K more than you originally thought you'd have to put in. And you might not have that money. Now, the good news is you have this appraisal contingency in place. So if you find yourself in this situation, you can just cancel the contract. No harm, no foul. However, I don't suggest that you just go right ahead and cancel the contract. Because you can cancel the contract, again, you have a ton of leverage over the seller. So instead, this is a great opportunity to negotiate with the seller to lower the purchase price. Now, ideally, you'll be able to negotiate the price down to its appraised value, $950,000. However, if you found the house of your dreams and you love it and the seller won't go that far down, maybe you can meet somewhere in the middle, say $975,000. So the appraisal contingency is removed when either the home appraises for its purchase price or better, or if the home appraises below purchase price, you're able to negotiate a new price with the seller, remove the contingency, and continue with the contract. And the last contingency to remove is the loan contingency. And this typically takes 20 days for the lender to allow you to remove this contingency. What the lender needs to do before you can remove this contingency is double check your income that it's continued this far into the escrow process. This contingency is basically just protection against you losing your job. Your ability to repay the loan is what qualifies you to get the loan in the first place. And if you lose your ability to repay the loan during the escrow process, the lender is going to say, look, we just can't lend to you anymore. And so if that happens, you are allowed to cancel the contract. So once the lender is able to give you final approval for the loan and you're good to go and there are no more checks on your income, then you can remove the loan contingency and you're ready to close. So what does it mean to close? Once the loan contingency is removed, once you've wired in your full down payment, you're ready to close, and it's actually a 3-step, 3-day process. On day 1 of the closing, you sign all of the closing documents. Now, the most important documents in this packet that you sign are the loan documents that specify how the loan works. The loan is recorded at the county registrar's office as a mortgage. It's a very official document, so you got to check it, make sure it's right, and then sign a whole bunch of pages. And also the new deed. A deed shows ownership of a property. So you need to sign the new deed so that when it goes to the county registrar's office to be recorded, it shows that you are becoming the new owner of the home. On day 2 of the closing process, your loan funds. Now, lenders want all the documents signed before they're going to actually wire the money to the escrow account. I mean, it makes sense. If I'm trusting you to buy $1 million home and I'm giving you $900,000 of that $1 million purchase price, I'm going to want to see that all the T's are crossed and all the I's have dots before I go sending in my $900K. And then finally, on the 3rd day of the process, the new deed is recorded. And this is actually kind of exciting. The escrow company physically sends a messenger with the ink-signed documents from their office to the county registrar's office. And the registrar just records things like who owns houses, who's getting married, who's been killed, who's died, who's been born, I guess. And the county registrar records the new deed. The messenger tells the escrow company it's been recorded, and then the escrow company tells the agents for both parties it's been recorded, the house is sold. So then all that's left for you as a homebuyer to do is collect your keys. You're a homeowner. It's time to get your keys, go into your new house, order a pizza, and eat it off the floor. And that's it. That's the whole process of buying a home in California. Now, the escrow process that we just talked about in detail typically takes 30 or 35 days. The whole process, when you include getting pre-approved by a lender and then shopping for a home, usually takes 2 to 6 months.